All right, well, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Do you mind just before we get started introducing yourselves and who you are and who you were at the time in 2005?
My name is Wolf Amacker. I was the Division Command Sergeant Major from early 2003 through 2006.
And I'm Lieutenant General retired Bill Caldwell, and I was at that time the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division from 2004 to 2006.
Great. Well, thank you again, gentlemen, for joining me today. I guess to get started, let's go back to kind of summer 2005, August 2005. Can you kind of give me a sense of what the division was kind of engaged with and what you guys were focused on at that time?
Most of the division was back from multiple deployments, and really we were, I think, in a period of significant reset and retraining after those multiple deployments, and really not looking forward at the time to a major deployment in the very near future.
In fact, the division was also going through their major restructuring. As you remember, we went from the traditional division structure to the new divisional structures during that time period.
4 brigades.
Sure. Yeah,
so we were getting ready to form an entire new 4th Brigade, take the Davarti and deactivate it and put its battalions into all the infantry, into the BCTs. And so there was a tremendous amount of planning, restructuring, where people were going to live. I mean, it was an enormous, we had an entire team set up and we're doing weekly briefings, just getting ready for that, which was going to take place around December timeframe.
Yep, I think we actually had the ceremony in January of 2006.
We did.
But like you said, all the planning went through December. It was a very, very busy time, like everything the division does. There's never really any downtime, but it was excruciatingly busy.
Of course. And then so August 2005 comes along, end of August, and this hurricane forms out over the Bahamas, comes, hits Florida, and then goes back into the Gulf of Mexico and kind of regenerates strength before making landfall again over multiple states on the Gulf Coast. When that happened, did you guys have a sense that, one, that what occurred would be as catastrophic as it was, and two, that the 82nd would be called upon to respond to that?
My answer is, what hurricane? I mean, you know, you see it on the news, and you feel empathy for the folks that are going through that, but we're busy. And you know, if it didn't say combat deployment and someone in the National Command Authority didn't say, hey, you know, we're looking at sending some troops, typically that didn't catch my eye, other than, you know, those poor folks down there. So from a tactical sense, which is kind of the way we thought of everything at the time, it really didn't pique my interest a whole lot.
Our Division G2 was briefing us on it.
Yep.
He was very much aware of and tracking it, as was FORSCOM. But again, there had been no indications at all that they might take and employ the 82nd Airborne Division if it was a catastrophic, as it turned out to be, it was. But nobody quite knew how devastating it would be when it hit landfall and where it would hit. And
using Title X forces was pretty much unheard of anyway. So, you know, the fact that we may be deployed for something like that probably wasn't foremost in our minds, even though, like Bill said, we got daily updates.
Sure, and we still had, you know, you guys were going through the changes in the division, as well as we still had 2 wars going on between Afghanistan and Iraq. And, you know, the history and legacy of 82nd were trying to go to combat, so that's what you guys were mainly focused on, right?
Absolutely.
And as I recall, we had, I want to say we had 2 battalions, not brigades, but 2 battalions individually deployed.
That's correct, Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right, 1 in each at that time. So we were tracking 2 of our real subordinate units over there at the time.
Right.
But transformation was, in fact,
the
big deal in town.
Yeah.
And now, so obviously the announcement did come. How did you guys receive the announcement that the 82nd was going to be heading to provide relief?
Well, I tell you what's interesting. Once the hurricane hit the the shores of, you know, the southeast down there, and we saw the devastation starting to occur in New Orleans, and we were listening to what happened in Mississippi and over into Alabama. Our G2 was really painting this just devastating impact that had occurred, and the mobilization of National Guard forces moving in there, and we're sitting there watching it on TV. And it was really about Thursday morning that in the morning huddle that we would have every morning at about 0600 amongst the very senior team, in fact, I believe it was Wolf that even said, you know, we probably should just go ahead and lean forward and anticipate that they might call us out to do something, and go ahead and call a, you know, DRB readiness exercise, and execute the 18th hour, you know, sequence.
Yeah, at the time, I'm not sure everyone understands the level of readiness that we used to keep. You know, we used to have to get folks out of here in 18 hours, in the air in 18 hours, and so that required a constant rehearsal of systems in order to make that happen. And so what we decided to do was, what a great reason to exercise our own systems, which we have to do anyway, and keep it as realistic as possible. Nobody likes, especially from the E4 and below perspective, nobody likes an alert just to come in early and make sure you can come in. But when it's tied to a reason, it makes it that much more believable. And so, you know, we went forward with that planning and actually initiated a recall.
So that Thursday, I remember talking to General McNeil down at Forces Command, because the 18th Airborne Corps headquarters itself was forward deployed at the time. And he said, no, there's nothing that's going on, Bill. We have no indications that the 82nd is going to be called in to assist. And I said, well, sir, what about if we do a no-notice readiness exercise tomorrow on Friday? He said, no, that'd be fine. I said, well, let me alert you then, sir, that we're going to do that, so if you get calls or something and you hear the 82nd being called in and we're going through the whole in-hour sequence, we're going to run it right up to loading airplanes and just check our systems. And that way, too, if something should occur or change, we literally will be ready to move. The only thing we were not going to do was actually issue the ammo itself in great quantities. We'd do very limited ammunition issue. So we went through the whole planning with a very small cell on Thursday, and early Friday morning, before even PT started, we executed the 18-hour sequence.
What's unique, what also happened though is, was it General McNeil that requested AMCOM send the C-17s?
Yes. Because
out of nowhere, 3 or 4 C-17s appeared that were diverted from previous missions, and when we did the actual alert Friday, we physically loaded up into an airplane. Before we called it up, we had the troopers manifested and on the aircraft along with the equipment, and the same time General Caldwell and myself also boarded the aircraft. When we said, okay, we're going to stop the exercise at this point, we were fully loaded and ready for the engines to start. And had the troops with us because we traveled with the DeVarty headquarters.
We did.
And Colonel Vic Petrenko and his crew, and we were all inside that aircraft when we decided to index. And what was even more amazing, though, is General Caldwell said, well, instead of indexing and completely stopping, let's leave our equipment loaded and we'll just take the people off.
So we came back to division headquarters, made the decision to leave everything in place through the weekend as just in case. Again, General McNeil still had received nothing from the Department of the Army that would indicate, because we talked to him late Friday afternoon, and he said, there's still nothing, Bill, you know, but yep, it makes prudent sense for you to leave everything in place. We posted guards through the weekend, knew we didn't really want to take our paratroopers and make them guard everything all weekend, but we decided, let's just do it anyway. Everybody kept everything in their motor pools or down on Green Ramp where we were. We left all of the division headquarters stuff, and we had loaded as if we were going to go to a disaster relief operation. So very limited, like I said, limited ammunition, much more focus on things that would be used for medical, heavy transportation, heavy engineer.
Movement of equipment, movement of people.
And so we tailored that DRB call out for that type of mission in anticipation of that. And so a lot of sorting through Friday.
A lot of sorting through. And matter of fact, one of the calls we made together was that we would not take ballistic helmets. We would go in berets because if we did go, we wanted to be, we wanted the troopers to stand out and people to see. There's nothing more visible than a maroon beret walking down the street, and so we wanted that as a visible sign if we ever went anywhere. So we said, if we go, we won't take ballistic helmets. But still, at the time, we didn't know we were going.
If you were watching the news at that time, the American soldier that was there, the guardsman that was out on the street, he and she were really receiving some bad press.
Yeah.
And the media was focused on they were a little too over
aggressive.
Too aggressive with the.
Right, and they were talking about, you know, they were all armed and you saw weapons at the ready. So Friday night, we released all the troops, left the guards there with the division. The command team did a good AAR with all of our subordinate commanders.
Yeah, well.
We stayed to about 2,000 hours, hashed through this, and one of the, like Wolf said, probably the biggest decisions we made was, if we had gone today, what would we have done? Again, still no idea whatsoever that they're going to call us out the next day. But we said we would have gone in berets. We might have taken the ballistic helmets in case they have to go into places where there is rubble and they need them.
Yeah.
But we're going to wear berets. Yep, we will arm like you're supposed to do, but we're going to make them literally put tape over their ammunition in their magazine, put it in their magazine. And then we came up with probably one of the most profound things we said. We went so far as to tell our paratroopers that if we had gone, at least in the command team there that Friday night, we would have told our paratroopers, you have the right of self-defense always, but what we would ask is literally receive effective incoming fire, because at this point you probably heard about the police stations down there in New Orleans coming under fire.
Right.
So there's
lots of
everybody
rumors
was very anxious about a lot of things, and we weren't getting great intelligence at this point. It was just the news media that was mostly feeding us. And we just said, look, and
the rules of engagement. We established a very specific rules of engagement.
Very restrictive.
And again, this was all before you guys knew you were
Yeah,
going.
and again, we had said if we had gone.
If we had gone, what would we have done today?
And believe me, we thought, I can't speak for General Caldwell, but I literally believed it was over. Okay, it was done. We're done.
Yeah.
We're through.
We went home that night.
Great exercise.
And in fact, the two of us were laughing Friday night. We said, gosh, you know, this was a wonderful drill.
What a great opportunity this would have been.
Can't believe, and we just kept saying, we just can't believe they're not calling out the 82nd Airborne Division. We are the most ready, combat-capable force that has the tremendous diversity of skill sets, from medical, from engineering, from aviation, from logistics,
construction,
supply,
engineering.
Have it all.
Yeah.
And we could be on that ground and have an immediate impact with a coherent command and control structure. One of the things again, in that AAR Friday night, a big part we talked about was how when you bring together National Guard units from 22 different states, establishing an effective command and control team with policies and procedures for reporting, for, you know, just all the things that we would inherently do.
Very established policies.
Yeah, we just said if we had gone again, one of the things we've done is very, very heavy on command and control so that we could help and assist with whatever federal, state, or local entities needed some further assistance. So in that AR, Wolf said, we may want to take some just command and control teams, like a battalion headquarters, or 2 or 3 extra battalion headquarters without the paratroopers in the organization, so that we can overlay it on and help other people. Again, we had a great AR that night, like I said.
It really was good.
It was probably 2,000. We went home. But I actually felt a little guilty that we had made the decision to leave paratroopers guarding our equipment instead of just putting it away and calling it a weekend.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because after going home, my wife asked me, hey, how'd it go? And after being here for a couple of years, she understood why we took so long. I said, it went great. I think, you know, it's just really sad that we're not going to be used. and I think that we'll just go ahead with whatever plans we had set for that weekend, and woke up the next morning and just typically started my workout, and that's how Saturday started.
That was the same at the Caldwell household. We had 3 young kids who were 2, 4, and 6. So we were up early that morning. We had gotten in some exercise, and literally I'm in the kitchen with my wife, and we're just talking, having some adult time, and watching the TV news, the morning news, while we're having some coffee, when all of a sudden they announced that the President of the United States is coming on to make an announcement.
Make an announcement.
And so I was very interested, but not even, still not even thinking.
Not a clue.
Didn't even occur to me that it could be us.
You think you would have received a phone call?
You
by
would have
then?
thought.
Oh,
You
yes.
would have thought. You would have thought.
So when the President came on and said, I have called out the 82nd Airborne Division.
I had to look at my shoulders. Absolutely.
I remember my wife looking at me, she goes, oh my gosh, our phones must not be working in the house. Because nobody had called. You know, the beepers hadn't gone off. There had been no notification. I mean, there was nothing that had alerted us. So I immediately called the division headquarters and got a hold of the staff duty officer, the ops center, and said, hey, have we gotten anything from FORSCOM? Have we been alerted? I mean, the President of the United States is saying the 82nd Airborne Division is going to help in the relief efforts down there. It didn't say where, but that we're being committed. And do we have a notification? And they said, sir, we don't have anything. I said, right now, call FORSCOM headquarters, get a hold of them. I said, there's got to be something out there.
And it's funny because I think before he even called the FORSCOM headquarters, while President Bush was still on the television, he called me and goes, woof, woof, you got to look at the television quick. And so I turned on the television, and all that stuff was going on, and it was literally surreal. It just didn't seem like that it was happening, and we couldn't believe it, but luckily my A bag and B bag were already on an airplane, and so I just put on my uniform and headed to work, and we initiated the recall. After that, it was actually it was amazingly quick from formal notification until the time we were in the air.
As I recall, it was about 9 o'clock in the morning when I saw that news thing. Wolf and I had talked on the phone. Obviously, as soon as I had, Wolf said, hey, I'm going to call the duty officer, tell him to execute the N-hour sequence. We did that, start the recall of everybody immediately. We didn't wait for the formal order to come down from the Department of the Army.
I think by the time we got it, we were three-quarters on the aircraft.
We figured if the President of the United States said we're going, let's just go ahead and execute. And so we started to meet a recall, but within 20 or 30 minutes, General McNeil called and said, yep, you all are going. He said it's sketchy still. Everybody's caught a little off guard. Not really sure where you're going.
Don't know what your mission is.
Don't know what your mission is, but get the troops assembled. We'll start diverting airplanes, and literally airplanes
come out of nowhere.
Out of everywhere were getting diverted. I remember one of the first ones that came in, because we were down at Green Ramp and almost in no time at all, and had this C2 structure set up and we're operating from down there, was the fact, I mean, these are planes that were coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and had done missions over there in the Middle East. And we're en route home back to Charleston, now diverted to us, getting extended crew hours at it. I mean, I would almost say the first
3 aircraft at least.
Yeah, they came in all extended crew hours.
Yeah.
So they were getting all kinds of special compensation to extend crew hours so that they could launch with us. And so we started loading aircraft. And again, we had no idea. It wasn't like you go through your normal planning where you know you're going to get X number of, C-17s or 130s. I mean, we packed them. We packed them as they told us what was coming in. We had quickly make the decisions who was going to. We worked out the order we wanted to flow. Fortunately, we had done so much work the day before. It was actually a seamless operation.
It's very quick, very efficient, very efficient. We got the division headquarters and the DeVarty headquarters in the air. How long was it?
4 hours.
It was under 4 hours in the air. And
yeah,
I mean, that's unbelievable.
By 1,300 hours, we were airborne.
In the air.
Wolf and I and the DeVarty headquarters.
En route to New Orleans.
En route to New Orleans. And still no idea what the mission was.
Well, when we actually lifted off, we did not even know where we were going.
That's right. Didn't know where we were going to land.
They didn't say New Orleans at that point.
No.
They said it could have been anywhere on the Gulf.
Anywhere on the coast.
It could have been anywhere on the Gulf coast. We were told, en route, you will be told your destination, and then you'll get further instructions. So obviously we had TAC set up. We'd set it all up the night before, and the aircraft that we had loaded. So we had good comms. We were talking directly with FORSCOM and Division Rear at that point now as we went airborne. And it was about 45 minutes into takeoff. Because I think we moved so much quicker than anybody.
Yeah, no one was ready for that.
Yeah, I don't think they thought we'd be moving until 2100 that night at the earliest. And here we were, 1,300 hours airborne, heading south. As the pilot and I, you know, as we were going up to the cockpit,
pilot, yeah.
he kept going, now, do you all have any idea
Where we're going? Yeah, he said, I'm just flying.
He says,
I'm just flying.
He said, I have vectored us towards between Louisiana and Mississippi.
Pilot didn't even know
Pilot had
where
no
you
idea.
No,
No one had any
no.
idea.
So you talk about flight plans, working
flight
with
plans.
the, you know, FAA and
This
everybody
is
else.
National Command Authority directed, and we were in the air. That's we'll go.
We had about 4 or 5 aircraft right behind us within another 10 or 15
couple
minutes.
Couple of minutes.
And so we were all heading that way. And but about 45 minutes into it, they said, "Hey, it's New Orleans International Airport. It's a mess. They've got all kinds of challenges there. You're going to Louisiana, and when you hit the ground,
Link up with
General Russ Honore, and he'll give you further instructions at that time.
Follow his instructions.
Follow his instructions. You are now working for him."
Yeah. And the landing at New Orleans International was probably one of the most eye-opening experiences that I had personally after both Afghanistan and Iraq, to see literally the shambles that place was in. We walked into a terminal that people had remained in for several days with no electricity, no plumbing, no command and control. So if you can imagine several thousand people with nowhere to go to the restroom and no one to tell them what to do and no idea when they're going to leave. The airport staff was overwhelmed, I think, in a matter of hours. And after that, it was just complete chaos. No violence, but when you walk through that area, the trash and the human waste inside the terminals was...
They literally had gone from bathroom to bathroom until it got too full of waste and debris, and then would just go to the next bathroom until it got full. And literally what they had done in the hallways, if you know how wide the airport,
not real big.
They had pushed one half of the hallways were just full of trash. And I mean, it wasn't like it was in bags, it was just trash. And now there was lots of agencies.
Sorry, were these just like displaced residents that were doing this, or
remember
actual,
that people tried to use the airport as a method of evacuation initially, and then the weather shut everything down, so everybody was stranded there. Just like everybody was stranded on Canal Street in New Orleans for an awful long time. That was another place that just humanity was concentrated on. You know, because of the waters, people weren't spread out over large areas. They were heavily concentrated in very specific spots that were typically going to be or had been some type of evacuation point. And that evacuation structure, which was never under, or I don't know whose control it was under, broke down. That structure broke down very, very quickly. And when you leave stranded people who are terrified for what's eventually going to happen, everything breaks down very quickly.
Now, we had just a quick glimpse of that, and then about that time we got the word that General Honore was en route in his helicopter. He was going to pick us up, and he was going to give us our mission. So we...
Before we get into the General Honore, do you mind if I just back up one second? So
absolutely.
When you guys were en route, obviously the rest of the division, because there was a ground convoy separately, right?
There was a huge gag.
And,
yes.
And it took them about how long to get down there?
Well, once we knew where we were going, you know, we were able to communicate back. We had the chief of staff back there who was literally running everything, and for us, working the C2 piece to keep things flowing. And
Chief was it General Chin? It wasn't General Chin at the time. It was boy, he's going to kill me for this one.
He's living in Fort Lewis.
I know it. Yeah, and with his lovely wife.
Yeah, gosh, she was awesome too.
He was great, Chief. Great Chief.
Okay.
We'll think of that in a minute.
I got a yearbook across the hall.
No, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. Yeah, we're going to cut that one.
Yeah, but anyway, so the chief was back there, and we had already talked about the fact. Yeah, so
Colonel
Akita was back there, and we had again from Friday night had talked that if we were deployed, depending on if we were allowed to determine, and we were pretty much given carte blanche to bring whatever we wanted to bring.
Yeah, it was really
there
nice.
was no real restrictions being placed on us. You know, sometimes they say you're only going to get 6 airplanes.
With a PVL, you know,
yeah.
no PVL, no nothing. Take what you want. Well,
and so we had already predetermined that, from Friday night that we wanted heavy logistics, engineer, medical communications to be put on the road immediately, because we figured we could almost drive faster than we could probably get enough generation of aircraft. So we would move the essential stuff for the division to operate, and then all the support that we would need for everybody else. We also at that time went ahead and put the aviation brigade, even though there was a joint task force of aviation assets in New Orleans that were where existed down there, we wanted our own independent assets that we would be able to control this to directly support us. So we went ahead and set up and first moved to FARPs and set up FARPs all the way down to New Orleans that Saturday afternoon to Sunday morning, and then launched our aircraft Sunday morning, FARPing their way down to New Orleans. And by afternoon, Sunday afternoon, we had our first 18 aircraft we brought Little Birds, we brought UH-60s, Chinooks, and they were all starting to land right there. We kind of just took over the airport at that
We really
point.
did. That was our base. That was our fob.
Yeah,
It was amazing. There was no one there. There were vehicles with keys in them,
yeah.
you know, and hangars, and everything was just as if somebody took a lunch break 30 minutes ago and left.
And the good thing is we had recognized too Friday night that we'd need lots of contracting officers. So we had done almost a crash course late Friday on contracting officers in all these units. Well, it paid huge dividends, because when we got down there on Saturday, we would walk into rental company car areas, would take the keys off, and we'd hand them to our paratroopers and say, here's your vehicles you're going to be using now until further notice. And we're tracking all this so we could make sure there's proper reimbursement done to the rental car. But they had left just the cars, the keys. I mean, so we just started using assets like that. We also had realized that when we first got there that there would be, just like we were when we were over in Iraq, we'd have to bring 55-barrel drums, cut them off, set up
There's no waste
outdoor
facilities.
urinals, outdoor urinals and waste and everything else. So every night we were burning huge 55-gallon drums of waste.
Just like you were
just
over
like
in
you're
Iraq.
deployed.
Yeah,
and it was nothing new to the paratroopers. I mean, it was like, okay, here we go again. And I mean, absolutely, if you've never been to New Orleans in August and September, the heat and humidity is amazing. It's brutal. And so it was very, very hot, very, very humid. There was no electricity. And so literally, General Caldwell and I slept in the parking lot on the ground for the first 10 days, literally, of the operation. When we slept, I mean, it was just like, you know, it was far, far from combat operations, but it was very similar in that there's very little time to sleep. There's always something to do. But, you know, we literally, he slept on the ground right beside me on the parking lot, right beside several of the PFCs in the division headquarters that were manning the communications devices and things like that. So it's not like anybody had any really nice places to go sit. That's how the first 10 days literally went. It was very interesting.
All right, so now that I got you guys off on a different tangent, we'll go back now. So you arrived at the airport.
General Honoré was coming to see us.
And you guys get told to either go see General Honoré, or he was coming to see you guys to give you the 82nd mission.
Come pick us up.
We were told he was coming to pick us up to give us our instructions. And I still remember the 2 Blackhawks landing. General Honoré gets off, and as you had seen, everybody at this point in America had seen him on TV, Don't Get Stuck on Stupid and everything else. And so he gets off, and he's got a cigar in his mouth. And he walks over, and we, of course, salute him and say, sir, the 82nd Airborne Division is here, we're waiting for instructions. And he looks at me, takes the cigar out of his mouth. I mean, I can almost vividly recall this. And he uses a couple of expletives along the way. And he says, blankety blank, airborne. If I've got to tell you what the hell to do, then we've brought the wrong unit
people.
down here.
That's right, we brought the wrong people.
And I said, well, sir, I just need to understand where you want us to operate. He goes, my gosh, and he got another little expletive and called me Airborne the entire month I was there with him. Yeah. I had no first name, I was Airborne. And he waves his hand like this, and he says, I want you to fix all that blank. And that was literally the instructions, fix that blank. And so he says, get in the helicopter. So Wolf and I would go over and jump in his helicopter.
We were getting in the helicopter, and he kept telling me, Wolf, don't make me beat your ass. He had carried a big stick. Don't make me beat your ass. I won't.
You know, I mean, and fortunately, I had known General Honore from before and have immense respect and admiration
for him. We knew he knew us well, that's why.
Yeah, he knew us both very well. And I also knew that he was doing a lot because of the American public being so concerned and so scared and so believing that everything was out of control. Honore was the guy that was brought in by the United States Army to establish order and calm and confidence and reassurance. And so, you know, he would hate if I say this, but 3/4 of what he does is showmanship.
All of it.
But it's a great showmanship.
It was good showmanship.
Yeah, it was good showmanship. And it had an enormously positive impact on everybody he interacted with in the New Orleans area.
It would have been a much different situation had it been a different person than Russ Honore.
So he takes us, lands us down next to the dome. National Guard had a little command and control thing set up there.
At the
right, the Superdome.
At the Superdome.
We landed right there. He had 2 high water trucks standing by.
That was his vehicle, an LMTV, with no canvas on the back.
So we go in and we can't find anybody to really talk to. He says, give these 2 guys a quick orientation. They talk for a couple of minutes with the ops captain that was in there. We go out and get in the LMTVs, and he drives us downtown to where the mayor is, staying in this hotel.
50-story, huge building. I don't know. Anything over 3 stories to me is huge. It was huge. It was probably 30, 40 stories.
Electricity's not working, so you know you go in and we're walking up the stairs, and what they had been doing is they had lived on a floor for a day or 2.
Wasted it.
Then they'd moved to the next floor, and they
Wasted
they were moving up like that as they were living, and so we get to where the mayor is, and
it's physically barricaded with furniture and anything you can find to make a physical barrier between the outside and in there. And we physically had to kind of yell and scream and tell back and forth who we were before we got into that area.
So we get up to see the mayor, and we tell him that we're the leadership from the 82nd Airborne Division. We at this point have over 3,000 paratroopers with all kinds of support equipment, either airlifting in, be put on the road tomorrow morning, or already the helicopters are starting to set up FARPs, and we'll be FARPing down and bringing more lift assets in tomorrow. Where do you want us to operate? And again, New Orleans.
He looked out the window.
He just said, I need you to help fix it. I mean, that was literally about Mayor Nagin's. Yeah, he just said, we need help. And so we left that site. And General Honore then drove us around to show us a couple of the things that he was most concerned about. We were east side of the interstate at this point in the downtown heart of New Orleans.
Well, and one thing Mayor Nagin did say was protect the French Quarter.
Yeah, he said at all costs.
At all costs, no matter what.
You have to protect the French Quarter. I need law and order. I need support. I need help in that area. I have to save the French Quarter. So we got that. We still hadn't been assigned an area, though. We just knew, go fix all that from Russ Honore. So we're driving downtown, and all of a sudden, we're standing on the back of the LMTV as it's driving along with General Honore right there, and he's banging on the hood. He says, stop, stop. The vehicle stops, and right over to the far right, you see this Winnebago, and you can see some lights on top of it. They're clearly
broadcasting something.
There's somebody broadcasting something. But General Honore wanted to stop, so he says, come on, Airborne. We jump out the truck with him. He runs over to the...
This is on Canal Street where everybody is congregated now.
Because right along the center strip of Canal Street, it was just dry enough so that
by the convention center.
Yeah, they could get their video trucks in there. Yeah. And so he goes to the back of this Winnebago, and he starts climbing up, and there's some producer or somebody trying to stop me. He just pushes him out of the way, and he says, come on. And 3 of us climb up there, and it's Geraldo.
Geraldo Rivera is broadcasting.
He's live, he's broadcasting. And he looks over and he sees General Honore, he sees me.
He sees the Maroon Beret.
And he sees Wolf. Well, Wolf had been his escort
in Afghanistan.
Just in the last year over in Iraq.
Iraq,
in
the
Iraq.
first time, and then Afghanistan.
Yeah, so he had been his escort over in Iraq for a couple of days. So they had a good relationship. He immediately recognized Wolf, and in the middle of the broadcasts, switches it and
on
says,
live TV.
I have just been informed that the 82nd Airborne Division is here. And he goes, and I've got my good buddy Wolf Amacker, and he brings Wolf over and pulls him in front of the camera, and he starts talking to Wolf, and you know,
General Honore and General Caldwell are behind me.
Yeah, we're both going, glad we brought Wolf along with us, you know. And anyway, so that was our introduction.
That was
the 82nd. And we had a mandate from the Department of the Army that, hey, with federal troops going in, once you've established where you're going to operate, please make a presence and make it known where you are. And so we had brought our, obviously, key part of our initial team going in was the Division PAO team. That went with us.
And that did a whale of a job.
She just did an incredible job. But
I wish I could remember her
so,
name.
Colonel Hannah, I believe it was.
Hannah.
It was.
Sure was. Airborne. Yeah,
And so we meet Geraldo, we jump the helicopter, we go back. And at that point, we've told General Honore, hey, listen, we've got National Guard troops all over down here, but there's just not enough of them. Why don't we just take a real recognizable boundary? We'll take the interstate that runs right through New Orleans. We'll take everything east of it. The Guard can have everything west. East of the, obviously the interstate is where the greatest
real damage.
The real devastation was you know, the French Quarter and everything else. And so we made that agreement. We talked to the National Guard still that night, coordinated back with them. Starting tomorrow morning, the 82nd Airborne Division would assume, and we'd do a battle handoff and get whatever information they had. And that's when the real work started.
It was just, after that was just amazing because of the horror stories that everybody not only had heard, but people were perpetuating, you know, that there was rampant gunfire, there was rampant murder, there was rampant rape, rampant thievery, and rampant desertion by state employees like police department, fire department, and things like that. And then what I think we typically discovered was that there were cases of shootings. They were pretty rare. There were cases of thievery, but 90% of the thievery was somebody trying to feed their people. That's right, feed their family.
Yeah.
And we didn't find multiple cases of rape. There was a significant death toll, and we were charged with taking care of that as well. But I remember we stopped by one police department that had literally turned 18-wheeler trucks over and made it into a fortification around their police department, and they called it the Alamo.
Yeah, they had a big sign up.
Said the Alamo, and they were
Yeah.
policemen in there with weapons facing out, willing to shoot people because they thought the situation was so bad outside. And General Caldwell and I and the aide at the time, Captain Cameron, Major Cameron, at the time, were walking through the city, just us, and we walked up to that area, and the police said, hey, you guys can't be out there. There's people that'll shoot you. They'll kill you. We came in and talked to them and said, hey, we've walked around. It really wasn't that bad, you know. So, but typically the stories had been, you know, of course, kind of magnified. There was problems, but there wasn't the rampant serious crime like theft or murder and rape, stuff like that.
The biggest thing we obviously, like in any military situation, we needed to gain situational awareness of what was in the area now we had responsibility for, what was going on, what were the needs, what assets would we need to employ. We had brought in our 3rd Brigade with us as the lead element that would be doing the whatever. Initially, we knew we were coming in. Yeah, knew we were going to do search and rescue as our primary mission first, presence patrols, and then recovery after that. And so the search and rescue piece, we had brought as many of our RB-15s that we had in the 82nd Airborne Division with us when we had gone in. So we were sending Chinooks out to Walmarts in northern Louisiana and literally landing in parking lots and going in and buying boats and motors with our pay officers and bringing them back, loading them in the back to Chinooks and flying them right back down to New Orleans. I mean, bringing our own assets became absolutely one of the greatest things we did, those lift assets, to give us that ability to quickly bring in, because we needed tons of more chainsaws than we ever thought. We ended up needing lots of boats with motors. But the thing that we found was all these great agencies that were doing things, whether it was the Fish and Wildlife people, whether it was the FEMA was there, whether it was the American Red Cross. I mean, there was enormous amounts
of... All the local installations.
Yeah, and then there was tons of local Louisiana folks that had just driven from northern Louisiana down with their boats.
There were lines of boats, fishing boats.
They were just putting them in the water, and they were just driving around.
Just asking for guidance. What do you want us to do?
To help
what do you want us to do?
And so we, that first day, had devised this big map. We'd broken ourselves into sectors. We'd started talking about how the brigade was going to systematically start clearing sectors and reporting it. We'd kind of come up with a little plan about how we were going to take this area of responsibility the 82nd had and literally go through it, make sure first search and rescue, and then follow on from there, stability, presence, and then recovery. And what we found very quickly was there was a lot of good
intent.
So the Fish and Wildlife people, they had this wonderful system of how they tracked and cleared areas. Yeah. What they needed now was the system the military was using to mark the houses and everything else. So what we did is we took one of our battalion command and control teams we brought down, and we put it in with the Fish and Wildlife people. They were exhausted. They had, they're not made for 24/7 long endurance operations. So we literally took and put in a complete battalion headquarters in there with all of its C2, and told the head Fish and Wildlife guy, they're going to work for you. We're not trying to take charge, but they will synchronize, coordinate, and ensure any assets you need are moved to wherever they got to be, and we'll pick up your marking system and use everything that you're using with the 82nd Airborne Division. I'll also every day land 2 Blackhawks here and send over 5 LMTVs with drivers that you can then, dispatch and use as you need to. And I mean, this is like manna coming from heaven to this, these poor folks in the Fish and Wildlife. They literally, wonderful Americans doing their absolute very best, just absolutely overwhelmed. And our communications capabilities were just phenomenal.
They bridged all the gaps that they needed, because there were so many different entities, Fish and Wildlife, FEMA, state, other federal agencies that all aimed at doing the same thing. And the FEMA guys didn't know what Fish and Wildlife was doing. The Fish and Wildlife didn't know what the state was doing. And the state didn't know what the federal government was doing. And so General Caldwell literally brought them all together physically and made them all see a common operating picture, and which made everything much more efficient. I mean, for example, the FEMA guys literally sent a few teams out to go do some search and rescue, but the FEMA headquarters had no idea where they were, no idea what they were doing, no idea what area they had covered and what area anybody else was covering. So it was such a disjointed effort on everybody's part until General Caldwell brought the cells all together to a single location and started making them all brief each other and talk to each other as this stuff was ongoing.
Communicate, so they weren't doubling efforts. And, it was
and we kept saying, listen.
They were tripling and quadrupling efforts.
And we kept telling them, we're not trying to take charge. And we don't want to be in control. We're the federal government coming in to provide assistance. We want to be in support of you. But we're going to give you our assets. We'll give you our helicopters. We'll give you our LMTVs and our paratroopers. We will give you the assets to make you successful. But to do that, we need to have everybody coordinated and synchronized and common operating pictures. So we literally came in and set up talk maps and talk tracking systems and brought our communications teams in and got
radio
the comms.
Operators.
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
It was incredible what we were able to very rapidly do. I mean, just like in the city of New Orleans, they've got a great emergency management system, but it was absolutely overwhelmed. People had left because of the hurricane. Those that had stayed, you had this retired Marine, and he was just working his tail off, exhausted as were all his people. So he needed comms that everybody could talk with. So we literally, again, another one of these things, we flew helicopters all around. We went and bought this massive communication system. We were taking around and putting repeaters on top of buildings with our helicopters.
With the helicopters, dropping them off.
Not asking for permission from
We
anybody.
had little Motorola's that now could talk wherever we were throughout the entire city. We blanketed a city with communication devices, and everybody benefited from it. And when from the top, you establish communications areas, their own frequencies, and they could talk, and then they could talk laterally, and you would find fire department talking to the police department, talking to FEMA, talking to Fish and Wildlife, talking to us.
And we bought all this stuff and just gave it out. And every repeater required generators and operators. So we were landing helicopters and had to replenish and supply them with fuel and water and food on top of these buildings. Most time, once we got them established, they would make the hike up and down these things. Our paratroopers would with the stuff.
Amazing.
But the repeaters were absolutely instrumental in giving that great communications. And once we started giving that common operational picture, it's just like
much more smoothly.
New Orleans International Airport. Absolutely, we counted 18 different entities there doing something good. But
Trying to
18 separate entities, not, and by chance they might talk to each other, but there was no overall coordination. So we took a brigade headquarters, Vic Petrinko, and told Vic, you're going to go in with your headquarters and you're going to be the support team for the New Orleans airport. We're going to bring down the division's manifest system from the G1. We had already alerted them, and they were already being flown down, and we're going to start automated manifesting, because it was all being done by stubby pencil drills, so you couldn't quickly figure out who had gone where or where they were. And so Vic Petrinko went in, found the head guy at New Orleans, small team, about 5 or 7 people that were still there with him. They were literally just spent. I mean, as you might imagine, overwhelmed. And Vic said, I am now your chief of staff. And as the chief of staff, I am going to run this thing for you. You're going to give me the guidance and direction, and myself and all my paratroopers are going to make it happen. With every asset you could possibly imagine is coming on scene.
In 2 days, it was a different airport, completely different.
I mean, we went in and took the trash out of the things. We went out and contracted and brought in plumbing teams and got the water systems back up to the degree we needed to, brought in portalets. We were bringing portalets in from everywhere.
To show you the difference, the very first night we were there, when we got back to New Orleans, I thought that my night was done for the night, and it ended up, we needed portalets in the French Quarter where we were about to put the 3rd Brigade headquarters and all the troops in a parking garage. We had gotten the early pieces of them out there already, and they had nowhere to go use the facilities. So I ended up driving I don't know where we got a Ford 350, but I had a trailer with 10 porta potties on it, and I drove it from New Orleans Airport to the French Quarter the first night, and honestly, not knowing, water depth or anything, that was one of the most interesting convoys I've ever done. But that's kind of the way it went. And one of the things I think people often forget, though, is while our paratroopers were down there and they began their search and rescue efforts, which they did just a magnificent job at, to show you how flexible and how adaptive our paratroopers are. Every one of these paratroopers, few of them were not combat veterans. Most of them were combat veteran from the last several months and had just gotten back from deployments. And yet, instead of an aggressive, go defeat the enemy kind of mindset, they were out doing rescue activities that they've never been taught to do on RB-15s or bass boats or the airboats that we drove around on a few times. But some of the hazards with that was people didn't realize just how contaminated the water was. There was human waste, proven E. coli, and just about everything else you could think of. And yet every picture you see and every activity of our paratroopers show our paratroopers waist deep and deeper, wading through this stuff when the local community folks wouldn't touch it. And they were hauling people from buildings and cutting people out of buildings. And that contamination, every night they would go back and be contaminated. So one of the things that I don't know who thought of it, but everybody thought, well, you know, we've got a chemical company. Why don't they set up a decontamination station just like we do when there's a chemical threat? And we ended up washing our paratroopers and our equipment after every operation. They'd go through and get decontaminated. It's just
so we
flexibility.
Literally, the chemical company worked their tails off for us down there, decontaminating every night. Our paratroopers, to keep them from getting sick is what we were worried about. Wolf came up with the phrase, this was all Americans helping Americans. And we echoed that throughout the formation. This is all about all Americans helping Americans. And our paratroopers were just, after most of them having had at least 2 combat deployments at this point, were just elated to be able to do something different.
Directly for their country. You know, we all fight for our country, but to help another American, you know, out of a situation and their pets was an amazing feeling for everybody.
Sure, is that active duty that's usually a very rare
Title
thing
10
as well.
is not something we do.
And the key thing that we really attribute to our success down there was we kept telling everybody we ran into, we said, we're here to work for you. We're not in charge, but we are willing to help make sure you're in charge. And you can use all of our assets to ensure you can do what needs to be done to be successful in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And that probably was one of the most key things, because I could sense, all of us could sense, a real apprehension about the federal government coming in.
There was some tension.
And you know, we wanted to take over, take charge, be the ones who took credit for things. And we really kept trying to stress, look, it's not about us, it's all about you. You just need some additional assets to ensure that you're a success, because you're well trained, you know what needs to be done, you know the lay of the land better than we do. All we want to do is make sure now you can do what you know that needs to be done.
Now, you guys came in with that kind of different mindset, and then you'd spoken earlier as well about when you guys went through the planning for if you were called up for this, before even knowing that you would be, that you guys made the decision you would wear the maroon berets. What effect do you think having that maroon beret that's recognizable across the United States had on your efforts down there, and when, you know, the paratroopers started going out and doing recovery, search and rescue, recovery operations, etc.?
I think Mayor Nagin kind of came up with one statement that really said it all. I'm not sure of his exact words, but it was at a conference where he and Bill were addressing someone, and Mayor Nagin said, I don't know what they did, and I don't know how they did it, but in 2 days my city changed. And he was referring to the paratroopers' presence, that when you saw a Maroon Beret walking through a street that had no power, it was flooded, and there had recently been crime in the area, the residents were incredibly relieved to see someone that they could trust. And not only could they trust the uniform, but it wasn't just a soft cap. It wasn't, you know, a black beret. It was a very specific maroon beret that I think elicited a lot of the response we got from the public. I remember Bill and I were walking through the French Quarter, and an elderly lady came out and gave everybody a hug and just wanted to say, hey, I just wanted you guys to know that as of last night, when you guys got here, I started sleeping with my windows and door open again. You know, and so it was pretty clear that, and a lot of the situations with the I think with the statue that we experienced.
That President's Patrols was so critical. The 3rd Brigade blanketed
really
our area.
People.
Every place that you could walk, there was a squad or a fire team that was on patrol. And again, if we found them with their weapons at the ready, they were admonished, because our guidance was you also sling your weapons over your back. Wolf and I didn't even carry a sidearm after the first day. Once we realized, look, this was so blown out of proportion from the press as to the security down here, we put our sidearms away and never wore them again. I mean, it just wasn't necessary. But even our paratroopers, we had them, if you see any of them in pictures, you'll see the maroon beret with the weapons slung over their back. And if you had opened up their ammo pouches, you would have found that everyone had tape across their ammunition, just so there couldn't have even been an accidental. I mean, again, as we talk to commanders and leaders, we would say, listen, we want you to go to such an extreme not to ever use deadly force, that if you receive fire, move.
Yeah, it better be effective fire.
If you receive effective fire, try moving again. And then if somebody is truly injured, when somebody's finally injured, then at that point, okay, you've got a right where we've now got to employ. And that never was necessary.
No, never.
It never happened. You know, there was 1 or 2 cases reportedly somebody thought something might have been fired near them, but I mean, we never had to ever lock and load. And the one time somebody did, they were immediately sent back to Fort Bragg within about 8 hours. Because General McNeil had made a small C-12 available to us there, that, you know, from FORSCOM. I sat on the tarmac to help move any emergency stuff, spare parts, people, equipment, whatever needed to be just moved immediately. And that fire team was sent back home that right after that, when we heard about it. I mean, because it just wasn't necessary.
Yeah, that was just the difference that the troopers made. You could literally see the city change over the couple of days to a place that was desperately without hope, to some place that was looking forward to recovering and getting back what they once had.
And then what was so really, you wouldn't think about this, but there was no bugs. When a hurricane
hurricane cleaned everything out.
Yeah, when they come through, for about 10 days, you're not going to see a single bug. It literally eliminates. But then the lava will eventually hatch, the mosquitoes will come back out.
It got ugly.
So I still remember, we were about in the 10th day, 15th day, and there was this big conference about whether we were going to spray.
On the Tortuga.
Was it on the Tortuga?
It was on the Tortuga. Okay. We went. The Navy also sent 3 ships in there to support us. It was truly a joint operation. Absolutely, it combined what we call it now with all the federal agencies. But yeah, we were on the Tortuga, and there were all the general officers and senior folks at the briefing.
Pentagon people had come down, and again, as only General Honore can do it.
Yeah. They started talking about the risk of
spraying
anthelopathy or something like that.
Spraying chemicals that, you know,
for the insects.
And we need to be careful about that. And I still remember Honore just kind of getting this bewildered look as this one Rear Admiral.
Entomologist. He was an entomologist.
He was an entomologist, this Rear Admiral from the Pentagon. Yeah. And finally, you know, he had had enough.
They were going back and forth on a debate. Should we spray or should we not spray? The overspray for the mosquitoes and stuff like that. Should we spray, should we not spray?
And the impact it might have on people and everything else. And in the end, as you might imagine, we sprayed.
We sprayed.
We sprayed.
General Honore was very, very clear.
Very clear.
And only the way he could be to this particular entomologist.
But it said, again, that was the tone. The great thing was, I mean, we had carte blanche to do whatever was necessary to get the mission done. We were allowed to bring engineering equipment down. We literally started, you know, as cars were at different places, we'd bring forklifts up and pick and move them to a parking lot. We'd record them, put them into a database that we had found the car at this location, moved it to this location, and placed it there to get it out of roadways. We were cutting down trees. Yeah. By this point, we had every engineer asset and some from the Corps that had come down, and we had bucket loaders and backhoes, and we had dump trucks and
wreckers.
And we were just hauling out debris right and left. We had gone into hospitals and got dewatering units. And we had pulled all the water out of the hospital, had got the electrical systems back up and running. In fact, there's stories still about this and the politics. And it was about in the second week, third week, that we really started seeing politics now start to influence.
They would say, don't fix this area, fix this area. Even though this area needs it more, we want you to work on this area. It started to become evident.
Yeah, and so it's about the third week. And then about that time, we moved over to this Navy yard. That was across the bridge.
Yeah, it was across the river from the city.
And went up there in Algiers.
Algiers.
We went into Algiers and established
the lower 9th Ward.
Yeah, as the new 82nd Airborne Division headquarters. Moved everybody. By this point, the airport now was starting to have flights back in. People were starting to come back in and take back ownership of their hangars and their equipment.
And this is like by the end of September, mid-September?
About third weekend.
Third weekend, yeah.
Third weekend.
Not quite the
so
end.
We returned all the rental cars we had been using, everything.
We
made
were
sure
back in
we
the
left,
military equipment.
Yeah, left all the notices so that they get the proper reimbursements, you know, for whatever the rates should have been. And once we could pass it back off to somebody who could take ownership of it, we started pulling out of New Orleans International Airport. Knew we needed to. We were still living in. Every time you saw a garage, a parking garage, you'd normally find the 4th, 5th, and 6th, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, all paratroopers living there, just living in parking garages. Yeah. And so we said we got to get them back to someplace, start feeding them some hot meals, getting them some showers, something more regular, because we'd been doing this now about 20 days.
And pretty long days too.
Yeah, we knew but we still had a lot of. Now we were totally into recovery at this point. Recovery and reestablishment of normal operations. Mm-hmm. The hospital was, Mercy Hospital was a huge one. And when we got it up, doctors started showing back up. We had the electric running. I mean, it was an incredible disappointment to us that after all the work we had done to get Mercy up and running, that then the state came in and condemned it on us. And we were like, well, look,
to move.
Everything's condemned down here, you know. At least there's a hospital that we got functioning, at least a couple of floors with power generation we had brought in. And there were volunteer doctors from the local area. We brought a complete MASH unit down and set it up and have been given free medical care for over 3 weeks at this point in New Orleans. Anybody could walk in and we would give you free medical care.
And shortly after that, a large National Guard MASH unit showed up too and set up on near the convention center. Where was it? Carnival Cruise Line sent a boat. The Carnival Cruise Line physically sent one of their cruise ships to give people that were primarily doing the rescue and recovery operations a break. And though we didn't, no paratroopers got on it.
Yeah, we didn't put anybody.
We didn't put any paratroopers on it, but the local and state folks certainly used it.
We thought that would be a terrible perception.
A little bit much.
You know, if we all of a sudden were living in those kind of accommodations. So we kept our people on the ground, even us. We had by this point gotten at least everybody a cot to get up off the ground. So you could at least sleep off the ground. But once we moved on to the naval base there in Algiers, the world changed. And
better
slowly
operations.
We were told there was private contractors who wanted to do the clearing now, so you can't clear here anymore. And then, in fact, we started getting a couple lawsuits that were brought against us to stop providing free assistance and aid to the communities at different locations. And all we needed was notification to stop, and we stopped. And we would pull back our assets. So by week 4,
we actually thought we were nearing the end. We thought, we're going to be done here pretty soon.
Because things were getting reestablished. But it was, the most amazing thing was to watch the American paratrooper. You know, they are the most resilient, the most versatile, the most imaginative young men and women you could ever meet.
Speaking about imaginative, one of the things that we encountered was that not only were people stranded, but like I mentioned earlier, their pets were stranded. So you would watch a rescue operation go out with bunches of empty boats with just paratroopers in them, and they would come back with dogs, cats, snakes, hedgehogs, parrots. What else did we find? Just you name it. And pretty soon we were pulling in almost as many pets as we did people, and so we were starting to wonder where are we going to keep them. So we also purchased, and people gave us cages, little cages to put the animals in. And at one point on the shore, near where the Tortuga was, our paratroopers were bringing back. It looked like a pet hotel. There were rows and stacks of these cages, and you could, if you named an animal other than an elephant, you could probably find it in that stack. But we realized we couldn't keep them there; they were going to die. I mean, the work to feed and water them was just massive in itself.
We brought down the division vet, put him overall in charge of this. We had over 500 animals at one point, and all their individual cages we had gone out and purchased. And we're having to purchase all the different feed that was applicable as best we
Yeah,
could.
you can't give dog food to turtles.
But really did help us, again, another private organization, again, just enough to get things stabilized. And then the private organization came in who actually would take pictures,
Put them on
look for
Facebook
markings,
or something.
and started putting out so people could reclaim their...
People were coming back down, getting their pets. It was amazing.
And then they took over the operation too. We turned that over to them. And then again, what we said is, look, our paratroopers are here to help you. There's a lot of animals here, more than you have here. You tell us what to do, and we'll work for you. And again, we did that, and it really started being incredibly successful, the amount of animals that were being reclaimed.
People that got reunited with their owners, that's...
If you're a pet owner,
you understand.
You can appreciate. I mean, there was one time where there was this woman who would not leave her house. She needed to leave. It was
bad.
Filthy, nasty,
Water was up to the
terribly
second floor.
deplorable conditions. I remember our paratroopers calling us, and Wolf and I got the call, so we jumped on one of the fly boats we had.
One of the airboats. Big fan in the back.
We went zipping over there, and as you're driving along, you hear this vroom,
when you go
vroom, you're driving over a car, or you hit a stop sign or something. And I remember us getting over to this location, and we pull up, and we paddle in the last part, and we get over to her, and Wolf and I are inside talking to her in her house.
Trying to talk her out of her house.
And she says, well, I'm not going in without my test. We said, ma'am, you won't. You don't have to worry about it. We'll bring your pets with you. She goes, well, I want to take them all the way in the evacuation. I said, well, ma'am, they can't do that. Yeah. The evacuation only allows people at this point. And, she wanted her pets, so we gave her this absolute ironclad reassurance we would take great care of her pets. So we took her and her pets to our pet area that were building at this point, turned her pets in there, made sure we got all her personal data, provided contact information, and then moved her to the processing center.
She was not going to leave without him.
But it shows you how emotionally attached. I mean, she was willing to live in squalor without food and fresh water in order to remain with her pets. They were that important to her. So we took those things into real consideration, went to great extremes, like in this case, where even the division commander and command sergeant major are out there helping an elderly lady out of her place, bringing all her pets with her, but telling her that once she started through the evacuation system, they wouldn't be able to process those with her.
But she'd always come back and get them, and she knew that. So.
Yeah.
So you guys started talking about the kind of the paratroopers and different things, but were there challenges for the paratroopers in adjusting to this type of mission versus normally training for combat, training for deployment at that time to Iraq, Afghanistan? Or is it just because paratroopers are adaptable and they'll get the mission accomplished?
Yeah, I think the paratrooper is such an adaptable person. We train him and her to be this amazing young American soldier who's, as we say, a double volunteer. You volunteer to join the Army, then you volunteer to go on airborne status. So they are special and unique, and they're different. And again, with as Wolf said, almost all of them that went with us were two-time combat deployers. So they had seen what it's like to be in a combat zone. They had seen the horrors of war. And the idea that they could help an American citizen was something they relished. I mean, they really, you could go by and talk to them in the evenings when everybody was back, and they would just talk about these wonderful stories of interacting with this lady down in the French Quarter, or opening up that one bar on that one corner.
That's right.
If you remember
the first bar that got opened up.
The first bar that got opened up. It had been sort of open, but it really got opened up. And
she kept wanting the troopers to come in and get a drink, and they kept saying, "No, we'd like to. We can't do it." It's funny though that on multiple deployments, you always hear soldiers complain about something. They complain about the food. They complain about the sleeping conditions. They complain about the rules of engagement or anything. But I never heard anybody complain at Katrina. Never, not once. And there were some pretty squalid conditions as well. So just an amazing source of pride for, I think, everyone, really.
It's like our paratroopers that were living on the Taratuga. They would launch their boats every day off the Taratuga. They had a
82nd Waterborne Division.
It was a launching boat specifically for amphibious ops, and so, but it could had about 140 of our paratroopers living there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that kind of that jointness that occurred down there with the Navy working with the Army, who was working with the Air Force,
General Caldwell made it possible. He asked the FORSCOM commander and the National Command Authority, could he give out joint awards because we had Navy, Air Force, I don't know if we had any Marines, but we certainly had those, and they gave them the authorization to do that, and the division awarded several joint commendations and other service commendations, Air Force commendations, Navy commendations, for the paratroopers that were involved in this. It was an amazing.
Yeah, we became a real
effort.
joint op, and it wasn't necessarily because somebody quote unquote assigned them to us as much as
They just came together.
we all came together, and all the services did that were down there. I mean, it really was wonderful to watch and see, and then our interaction with all the federal, state, and local entities and people like the American Red Cross and these relief societies and all the religious groups, oh my gosh, UMCOR, United Methodist Missions, and others that came in there that would say, look, we're trying to do this, we want to get set up, where would you recommend, can you help us get this put in place, can we possibly get a tent? I mean, whatever somebody needed, and then we'd tell them, well, you know, we've already got one relief agency over here who's doing this, perhaps you might want to go over here, and they go, well, that'd be great, then we'll go over there. So we were able to really work with a lot of relief organizations. The outpouring of support from Americans.
Amazing.
We had men and women showing up from churches across the United States that brought tools and equipment coming down asking where could they help. We had doctors and nurses showing up asking where could they be employed. I mean, they would literally drive in, and fortunately had such a good C2 structure set up at this point around the city that when somebody would enter like that, we would very quickly be able to go to the...
Communicate to whoever was handling that sector.
Yeah.
Set them up.
Set them up, provide the assistance, and they said, well, what do you want us to give them? Whatever they need to be successful. Well, they don't have any water. Okay, put them on your daily water resupply run. They're now part of our water resupply run. You know, we didn't worry about who was paying for it. We didn't worry about, I mean, General Honor Rate gave us tremendous leeway, and we would capture obviously all the costs and things, but just make it happen. Do what's right to take care of Americans, and we'll worry later about all the costs and permissions associated with it, as long as you're doing it for the right reason. And that kind of flexibility was enormously important for us to do what we achieved. And
so the mission went along, and I mean, eventually you guys reached an end state, and the division's time was over. What was that kind of, was it a decided end state of when the division would leave?
Certainly wasn't that cut and dried, believe me.
I'm sure I wasn't trying to make it out.
No, I know, but we thought it was. We really did. I think we could both tell when it was obviously winding down, and you know, as in any other deployment, you start thinking about, okay, getting back, getting reset, you know, getting ready to assume mission again, because that's obviously, you know, what the 82nd does. And then we started getting stories about another storm brewing in the Gulf.
And then Katrina, so that's Katrina, then you had Rita. So at this point, we've now, quote unquote, really developed some TTPs for disaster relief and have got the system down pretty good, and Rita comes in. So we get the call from General Honore, and he goes, hey, Airborne, I want you to go ahead and deploy forces and get ready to respond to Rita. It's going to be a devastating effect down the southwest side of Louisiana. So Wolf and I take a detachment from the 3rd Brigade, a group of helicopters. Again, we took portions of everything we had, and we moved down to southwest Louisiana.
To be in the path of the storm, to wait for the storm.
So we figured out where we thought the storm was.
Everybody else going that way,
yeah,
and we're going that way.
We went and met with all the local officials that we could find, obviously helicoptering around, Wolf and I did, making contact saying, listen, we need to know where the schools are that have the best
largest facilities
where we could move into and put our paratroopers there, because we're going to weather the storm, we're going to live in it, and then as it goes over our heads, we're going to pop right up and start disaster relief immediately on the spot. I'm going to put the helicopters just outside of the zone with 58s to give us the aerial, you know, observation to help guide us into places. We took all our boats down there. We took everything with us because it was no longer really needed in New Orleans. And we were in different high schools down there, or schools. I don't know if they're high school, but different schools where we, and I still remember that night as the storm came through.
It was a big one.
I mean, the Humvees were flipped over the next day. I mean, there was a lot of our own devastation, even though we had hunkered things pretty well. Everybody was fine, but we popped right up and went right into operations. We had worked with all the local authorities ahead of time. They knew we were there. We had all the communications already in place to start working The helicopters were up telling us where the devastation was. And it really was an incredibly seamless response. I mean, very few people hear about Rita because the fact that
I think it was handled so smoothly.
We had over 1,200 paratroopers that weathered that storm and immediately popped up the next day with all kinds of aerial support to immediately provide assistance to the local officials and the state officials that were there.
One of the places we visited the next morning, I remember distinctly, was a little town called Cameron. And I remember the town Cameron because General Caldwell's aide was Major Cameron. And we went, and Cameron just ceased to exist. There was a foundation of the post office, and that was about the most prominent feature remaining because it was right on the coast. The cemetery was basically uprooted. There were coffins visible. It was just horrible looking, but to me, one of the most shocking things, I didn't know that that area was really well known for cattle ranching. Just, I'm not that geographically intellectual, but when we flew over, it's a rolling terrain, and the waters had completely taken over the vast majority of the area, so only the high points of the ground were now uncovered. All the cattle, of course, had moved to the high points, and so for as far as you could see, there were hills with cattle on those hilltops, and which didn't look all that unique until you got into the air and flew over it, and you would find high spots with cattle circled and on the high ground, and everywhere you could see in the water were alligators. And I'm talking alligators bigger than this table.
Because this was a big...
Large alligators.
There was alligator farms down there.
Yeah.
So this was a big alligator farming area.
As well as the wild alligators.
Yeah, as long as, so the combination of the two all getting displaced. I mean, you saw alligators everywhere.
Everywhere.
And so
amazing for them waiting for a cow to get a little close to the water and then grabbing them and taking them in.
So the local officials explained to us that if a cow drinks salt water,
yeah,
they go crazy and they'll die. So they'll lose their cattle. So on each of these spots,
paratrooper ingenuity again.
They said, we need to get fresh water and food to them as soon as we can. So once again, we went and bought kiddie pools.
Kiddie pools.
We flew north, that Kroger, Walmart, whatever it was.
You know, you see those little 3-foot around kiddie pools?
So we started buying we bought as many kiddie pools as we could. We put together watering teams in helicopters with Chinooks that would literally fly in, pull off a kiddie pool.
Kick a bale of hay.
Kick a bale of hay off, and then we had bought all these huge blocks of ice.
A paratrooper's idea, because we couldn't figure out how to carry the water.
That's because we were trying to figure out we were going to use water cans, and somebody,
some young paratrooper, some aviator said, why don't we just take blocks of ice and drop the blocks of ice off and it'll melt and the water will be there. We did that all throughout the entire region.
So for the next 2 or 3 days, while the water was subsiding down, we were flying our Chinooks into these little dry spots and putting in kiddie pools with ice and bales of hay that were out buying and kicking out to try to save as many of the cattle as we could. Because
that was the people's livelihood. That was how they survived. If the cattle died, they had no more livelihood. And what was amazing was that community's desire to fix themselves.
Oh.
They really didn't want us around.
By this third day, they wanted us to leave.
Yeah, we got this.
We got this. Yeah. Appreciate your initial support in the first 72 hours. We're fine.
Which I thought was amazing. I thought that was great.
But again, I think everybody had leaned so far forward across the state.
Sure, you'd learned the lessons from before, and you got everyone pre-organized. You were able to set priorities.
Knew exactly what to do, and that's knowing what to do when there's no one to tell you what to do, and no idea. The paratroopers looked around, saw what they needed to do, and went out and helped people, and they cleared damage, and they helped the livestock, and it was just an amazing event.
Probably one of the most interesting things that happened during that time period was when there was an American who had died, we were prohibited from touching the remains. That had to be done by this contracting group without going into the names.
Initially.
who was supposed to do it, but yet our paratroopers kept finding remains. And we had brought a lot of body bags with us in anticipation of finding Americans who had deceased. And so we finally made the decision, got a general honorary to approve it, to go ahead and at least, if we found the remains of American, to humanely as possible put the remains into a body bag, tag it, 10-digit grid off GPS, any identifying figures put into the bag with the person that we could find, and then of course the location where we found the body. We found a lot floating that we had just picked up and then marked the 10-digit grid where we found them at least floating, not knowing anything else. But Wolf had to end up organizing a team to work this, which really was pretty miraculous what you all did.
We actually, when the contract, we realized, and I think the National Command Authority realized, that the contract wasn't working. The contractors heard about the violence, and I think the stories that were so blown out of proportion, a lot of the contractors quit. Said, I'm not going to go into a place where they're shooting at me. I'm not going to help recover deceased Americans in a situation like that. And so we actually had to go to a meeting with some very senior folks, and we got some very good directions about doing that. And so I put together a team of both partial contractors and soldiers, and we went throughout the city to locate deceased Americans and to ensure that they were retrieved with dignity and taken care of for that entire time, and there were many.
So we brought a reefer truck in. I mean, we brought the assets necessary,
it's still extremely hot.
Again, as an interim basis to help as much as we could. The governor was great. She and her team were very receptive, would bring us up to key meetings. Wolf and I would fly up to key meetings that she would hold, meet with her folks that were working things. Again, we always kept stressing, we are here in support of whatever the governor wants, the local city officials want.
Federal government's not in charge of this.
We don't want to be in charge of anything, but we sure want to be right there in support of everything.
We're here to serve.
That's exactly right.
And we did a lot of that.
So eventually the mission did come to an end. You guys had to return to Fort Bragg. But how long was the division, or did the division end up being in the Gulf Coast area doing recovery efforts?
Almost a month.
Almost, yeah, right at a month. Very, very close to a month, one way or the other, short or long. And obviously, as in any large scale deployment, some people leave first and some people leave last. So I think we probably both sides of a month, but not long. It went by very, very quickly, and honestly, for the devastation and extreme hardship that our paratroopers witnessed, I heard from paratrooper after paratrooper, this is by far their best deployment. For feelings and emotional gratitude and the ability to go out and really do things that I think everybody enjoyed it.
Then the governor was so appreciative for what we did that she authorized the Louisiana Humanitarian Service Medal to be presented to every one of our paratroopers that had been down there and participated in the operation. Now, of course, you couldn't wear it on your active duty uniform, but that gratitude of expression, understanding that we had helped make a difference, that we had been part of a big team down in the state, was real important.
Yeah. When you guys did depart, General Honoré had some, very succinct words and defined mission when you guys arrived. Did he have some parting words for you guys, or is it?
I think at that time he was probably so engaged with everybody else. Every time we saw him, he thanked us immensely, and in his own way showed a lot of gratitude. I think he threatened to whip my ass 4 or 5 times, and each time I'm sure it was out of love. I don't remember him at the end saying anything. I think we were all pretty much in quietly and out quietly, I think.
And he was such a great boss for this kind of operation to work for. He had an attitude of, we're going to get it done. I'm not really caring about what the costs are. don't let regulations encumber doing what's smart and what's right.
Yeah.
And always put the American citizen first. And that general attitude that he pervaded.
It's pretty clear guidance.
Yeah, it enabled us. We didn't need, you know, I mean, in his, literally, I'd kind of do an evening phone call with him, radio discussion, give him a quick update from the day. And he really just wanted to know anything you need help with. He really didn't want to know we rescued this many people, we did search these many homes. He wasn't really interested in all that. What he wanted to know was, what else do you need to keep being successful and accomplishing your mission?
He had a lot of confidence in us.
Yeah, he said, do I need to go take, is there somebody from the state that's not helping you? Is there someone from the federal government that's impinging upon you? What do you need, Caldwell? You know, or Airborne, as he always said.
Yeah.
What do you need, Airborne? But just so a wonderful boss to work for in that kind of environment, and it worked out great.
Well, he did.
Yeah.
So looking back on it since then, what do you think the lasting impact of the division's legacy there with the support to Katrina is? I mean,
well, I think the example of what we did.
I mean, obviously, you know, the division was a very small part of the overall recovery efforts. I mean, a lot of people played into it, and it went on for years after that. Not necessarily on the military side, but more on the civilian side.
Well, there's a great human interest story that occurred. There's this famous cathedral there in the French Quarter, and
Is it St. Joseph's Cathedral?
I was trying to remember the name,
I can't
but
remember either.
the bishop who was in charge there, much elderly gentleman, had approached some paratroopers. He had seen them outside wearing the maroon berets and said, "Listen, I need some help. A tree has fallen in the back of
Massive oak tree. Massive oak tree.
in the back of the church courtyard back there, and I really need to get it removed. I'm worried about the damage." And there's a statue of St. Mary that it hit.
Was it St. Mary or Jesus?
It was Jesus.
Jesus, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think it
Statue
was
of
Jesus.
Christ, yeah.
And I need some help with it. And so we took, literally our paratroopers had to build all kinds of ingenuity type of.
To lift this heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, this tree was bigger around than this table.
They
It
didn't
was
just
4
come in and
feet
chop.
circumference.
Yeah, they didn't
easy.
just chop the tree up. They had to build pulley systems and support mechanisms, and we gave them the mission. This is about in the second or third week, so recovery was already, I mean, search and rescue was already over, long over. Yeah. We're now in recovery ops. So in the recovery ops phase, they go in there, and as they're doing it, this massive oak tree falls.
And there's a statue of Jesus Christ with his hands outstretched like this. It's probably 10 or 12 feet tall.
Oh, yeah.
This big statue on a pedestal, but the tree is, you know, half the size of division headquarters. And the hurricane knocked the tree down, and the tree itself did not, I mean, it's amazing. It missed all the branches, everything went around the statue, but limbs struck pieces of it and broke off a thumb and a forefinger on one of the hands, and
our paratroopers found the pieces.
Found the pieces.
And so there's a picture of Wolf and myself meeting with the bishop to give him back these last 2 pieces that our paratroopers had found.
And this bishop had been a chaplain in the 82nd Airborne Division in World War II.
Wow.
I mean, the thought that
he was a Panther, matter of fact.
Yeah, that he could have gone. He was a 505th Regiment guy. That he could have gone full circle like that, and we had a chance to spend some time with him talking.
Amazing,
not just
amazing.
Not returning the favor, but even before that, and he just said, when I saw paratroopers, he said it reminded me of World War II. He said, here we were in the French Quarter, total, you know, pandemonium's taking place. People are panicking. They're fleeing. Everybody's concerned for their life. And he said, and I saw the maroon beret walk in. I saw the paratroopers. And he says, right then I knew that we had been saved.
Yeah, we were going to be
okay. I mean, he has a wonderful story he would share about his feeling and inside, remembering World War II and what the paratroopers did for France and how they did so much relief for the French citizens there. And he said it was like a reenactment, but in a different kind of way, because this is now Americans on Americans. But he said just that sense of excitement. And he said, so that's why he said I approached the paratroopers, because I knew their temperament, I knew their style. They wouldn't say, well, we don't do that kind of stuff. But in fact, it was absolutely, you know, Monsieur, you know, I think they called him Senior Monsieur. I'm not Catholic, but they said, we'll get to the leadership and make sure they know. And once it got to our engineer battalion commander, he didn't even hesitate. he said, yeah, we're in recovery phase. This is one of the missions we can take care of.
Yeah, absolutely. They did a wonderful job. Wonderful job.
Yeah.
I guess just the last thing I really have then is so when you guys were down there, I mean, obviously it was just about a month or a little bit over. How much or what support, how was the support of everyone back home, like the city of Fayetteville, the community? Were you guys getting, the division folks on the ground getting support from back home? And I mean, obviously it's hard to do what we do where we go forward and deploy without having that support anyway, but.
I think that the city itself cheered this effort more than I think typically, because they understood it was the same thing. We were helping our own in this one, and the city of Fayetteville has always been, I mean, it's been home for me for the last 40 years, and it's always been one of the greatest support structures I think the paratroopers have when they know that their families are going to be well taken care of when they're gone. I mean, there's nothing worse than to deploy and worry about your family back home. And I think no one worried about that because we knew that Fayetteville was going to take care of them, the Division Rear Detachment was going to take care of them, and I never heard of a problem.
One of the wonderful stories was to hear when our convoys launched out on that Sunday morning. They had notified the city that would be traveling through.
Large convoys.
They showed up with this massive police escort to take us from the gates of Fort Bragg all the way out to 95 to make sure we got on the road without any, so we wouldn't have breaks and contacts and clear the roads. And they talk about, and because although we had tried to coordinate it, we really didn't know how, but the city somehow took care of the police escort, and we were handed off from police to police all the way down to Louisiana. They said every time we would stop for a break, Americans were bringing out free food. Yep. They wouldn't let our paratroopers pay. I mean, now this is 2,000, 1,000 vehicles, 2,000 paratroopers, and this massive groups of convoys that we have heading south. They're all police escorted. They're all, when they pull into, truck stops, or I mean, people are just bringing things to them because they're so grateful that American soldiers, in this case paratroopers, are going to help the devastation down in New Orleans. And I mean, it was, our paratroopers talked, I mean, people were waving and honking their cars as the convoy's heading south. I mean, they knew exactly where everybody was going, and yeah.
Good time. Another jewel in the 82nd's crown.
It's true. Very true. Well, I feel like I could sit here and just listen to you guys tell stories all day, yeah. But I know you have other things to do. Thank you very much for coming by today and being able to talk about this, piece of our history in the 82nd. It's 100 years this year, and we want to tell as much of it as we can.